The Imperial Nursery stood as one of the most magnificent structures on Draconos Prime, its crystalline spires reaching toward the purple-tinged sky like grasping claws. Within its gleaming walls, the most precious cargo in the known galaxy lay sleeping in specially designed incubation chambers. These were no ordinary infants. These were the offspring of Emperor Vorthak the Eternal, the last of the great dragons and ruler of the vast Draconian Empire that spanned 47 star systems. The nursery had seen 12 different caretaking species attempt to tend to the Imperial clutch over the past solar cycle. Each had failed spectacularly, fleeing in terror or requiring immediate medical evacuation. The crystalline healers of Prism 7, renowned throughout the galaxy for their gentle touch with the most delicate lifeforms, had lasted only 3 rotations before their senior caretakers suffered what could only be described as a complete mental breakdown. The empathic Zephyrians, who could supposedly soothe any creature through their psychic abilities, had departed after just 2 days, claiming the dragon hatchlings possessed minds like blazing supernovas that burned away all thoughts of peace. Now, as Chief Nursery Administrator Kelthra paced nervously across the polished obsidian floor, she faced what might be her final chance to find suitable caretakers for the Emperor's children. Her scaled hands trembled slightly as she reviewed the files on her personal display unit. The latest applicant was perhaps the most unlikely yet a single representative from a species called humans, hailing from a small world in the galactic rim called Earth. "Are you certain this is wise, Administrator?" asked her assistant, Subcommander ZYX, his reptilian features creased with concern. "These humans have no experience with our kind. Their world isn't even part of the Empire. They're barely spacefaring." Kelthra's golden eyes flickered with desperation. "At this point, ZYX, I'm willing to try anything. The Emperor grows more impatient by the day. If we cannot find suitable caretakers soon, he may decide to handle the nursery duties himself, and we both know how that ended last time." They both shuddered at the memory. Emperor Vorthak, despite his paternal instincts, possessed all the gentleness of a solar storm. His last attempt at direct childcare had resulted in 3 destroyed nursery wings and a crater where the peaceful meditation garden once stood. The massive entrance doors hissed open, revealing a figure so small and fragile-looking that Kelthra initially mistook her for a juvenile of some unknown species. The human stood barely 5.5 feet tall, with soft brown hair pulled back in a practical style and wearing what appeared to be some sort of white uniform. Her skin lacked scales, claws, or any visible natural armor, and her eyes were an unusual shade of blue that seemed to hold depths of calm that Kelthra found oddly mesmerizing. "Administrator Kelthra," the human said, her voice carrying a musical quality that was somehow both gentle and confident. "I'm Sarah Chan, from Earth Medical Corps. I'm here about the caretaking position." Kelthra exchanged glances with ZYX, who seemed equally bewildered by this soft-spoken creature. "Miss Chen, I must ask, are you certain you understand the nature of this position? These are not ordinary infants. They are dragon hatchlings of the Imperial bloodline. They possess breath weapons, enhanced strength, telepathic capabilities, and temperaments that have driven away some of the galaxy's most skilled caretakers." Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that reminded Kelthra of her own mother's confidence when dealing with unruly dragonlings. "Administrator, I've spent the last 15 years working in pediatric intensive care units on Earth. I've handled premature babies weighing less than a pound, children with severe autism who couldn't tolerate any touch or sound, and infants going through withdrawal from various substances. I've been kicked, bitten, screamed at, and once had a toddler set my hair on fire with a makeshift flamethrower he constructed from art supplies." "Set your hair on fire?" ZYX whispered in amazement. "Human children can be remarkably creative when they set their minds to it," Sarah replied with a chuckle. "The point is, I've learned that every child, regardless of species or special abilities, has the same basic needs: security, comfort, consistent care, and understanding. If you're willing to give me a chance, I'd like to try." Kelthra studied the human more carefully. There was something about her demeanor that inspired confidence, despite her apparent fragility. Perhaps it was the steadiness of her gaze or the calm way she carried herself even in the imposing presence of 2 7-foot-tall draconian administrators. "Very well," Kelthra decided. "But, I must warn you, the previous caretaker team consisted of 6 highly trained professionals. You would be working alone, at least initially. The hatchlings are currently in an agitated state. They haven't had proper care in over a week. Then, we shouldn't waste any more time, Sarah said simply. The journey to the actual nursery chambers took them through a maze of corridors lined with portraits of the imperial lineage. Ancient dragons gazed down from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to follow the small procession as they walked. Sarah showed no sign of intimidation, instead studying the artwork with what appeared to be genuine interest. "How old are the hatchlings?" she asked as they walked. "Approximately 6 months in standard galactic time," Kelthera replied. "In human terms, they would be equivalent to infants around 8 to 12 months old, though they possess capabilities far beyond what human children that age might have. So they're mobile but not yet verbal," Sarah mused. "Still learning to coordinate their movements and probably getting frustrated when they can't communicate their needs effectively." ZYX looked at her in surprise. "How did you know that?" "Child development follows certain patterns across species," Sarah explained. "The basics of growth, learning, and emotional development tend to be universal. The specific abilities might differ, but the underlying needs remain the same." They paused before a massive door marked with warnings in 17 different languages. The symbols glowed ominously, and, even through the thick barrier, they could hear sounds that made ZYX's scales bristle, high-pitched wailing mixed with what sounded like small explosions and the occasional roar that shook dust from the ceiling. "Last chance to reconsider," Kelthera offered, though there was hope in her voice. Sarah adjusted her small medical bag and straightened her uniform. "I appreciate the concern, but those sound like babies who are scared and frustrated. Let's go meet them." The nursery chamber beyond the door was a scene of beautiful chaos. The room itself was stunning, walls of polished silver and gold that reflected soft, warm light from floating crystal orbs. Toys of every conceivable design were scattered across the floor, most of them bearing scorch marks or bite marks. Comfortable sleeping areas had been carved into alcoves along the walls, each one lined with soft materials that looked like they had seen better days. And, in the center of it all were the 3 most magnificent and terrifying creatures Sarah had ever laid eyes on. The dragon hatchlings were about the size of large house cats, but that was where any comparison to Earth animals ended. Their scales shimmered with an inner light, shifting between deep emerald, brilliant sapphire, and molten gold depending on the angle of view. Their wings were already well developed, allowing them to achieve short flights around the chamber, though their landings left something to be desired. Each possessed eyes that held an intelligence far beyond their age, and, when they turned to stare at the newcomers, Sarah felt a slight pressure in her mind as they attempted some form of telepathic contact. The largest of the 3, the one with primarily emerald scales, was currently breathing small jets of flame in the direction of a hovering toy that had apparently offended him in some way. The sapphire-scaled hatchling was attempting to climb one of the crystal light fixtures, her claws leaving scratches in the supposedly indestructible surface. The smallest, whose scales seemed to shift constantly between gold and silver, was curled in a corner making sounds that were unmistakably those of a crying infant, despite the fact that each sob caused small sparks to dance around her tiny form. "By the stars," Kelthera breathed. "They've gotten worse since yesterday." Sarah was already moving forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She spoke in a soft, melodic tone that somehow carried over the cacophony. "Hello, little ones. You've been having a rough time, haven't you?" The emerald hatchling immediately swiveled his head toward her, his flame breath cutting off abruptly. The sapphire one ceased her climbing and dropped to the floor with surprising grace, landing in a crouch as she studied this new arrival. Even the crying golden hatchling lifted her head, her sobs reducing to small hiccups. Sarah knelt down about 10 feet away from them, making herself as small and non-threatening as possible. She reached into her medical bag and withdrew something that made both Kelthera and ZYX tense. It appeared to be some sort of food item. "Miss Chen, I must warn you, feeding the hatchlings requires special protocols. I'm not going to feed them," Sarah said quietly, still focused on the 3 babies. "This is for me." She unwrapped what appeared to be a simple sandwich and took a small bite, chewing thoughtfully as she watched the dragons. The emerald hatchling tilted his head in confusion. The sapphire one crept a few steps closer, her curiosity clearly piqued. The golden hatchling stopped crying entirely, watching with wide eyes as this strange creature sat calmly in their domain and ate what looked like the most boring food imaginable. "You see," Sarah explained, her voice carrying that same calm tone, "when babies are upset, they need to see that the adults around them are calm and safe. If I'm worried or scared, you'll pick up on that and it will make you more anxious. But if I'm relaxed enough to have a snack, well, that tells you that everything is probably going to be okay. She took another bite of her sandwich, and something remarkable happened. The pressure Sarah had felt from their telepathic probing intensified, but now it carried a different quality. Instead of the chaotic emotional storm she'd expected, she sensed something more like curiosity mixed with cautious hope. "That's better," she murmured approvingly. "You're all very smart, aren't you? Much smarter than anyone has given you credit for." The sapphire hatchling took another step forward, her head cocked at an angle that reminded Sarah irresistibly of a curious puppy. Without making any sudden movements, Sarah slowly extended her hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. "Would you like to say hello?" she asked softly. For a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, the hatchling stared at the offered hand. Behind Sarah, she could hear Kelthera's sharp intake of breath and ZYX's muttered prayers to various draconian deities. Previous caretakers had required special protective gear and telepathic shields before even entering the nursery. This human was offering her bare hand to creatures that could bite through steel. The sapphire hatchling took one more step forward and gently touched her snout to Sarah's palm. The contact sent a jolt through Sarah's mind, not painful, but overwhelming in its intensity. For a brief moment, she experienced the world through dragon senses, feeling the electromagnetic fields that surrounded every living being, tasting the emotional resonance of everyone in the room, and sensing the vast web of telepathic connections that linked all draconian minds. But, underneath all of that alien sensation, she felt something achingly familiar, a baby's desperate need for comfort, security, and love. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "You've been so scared and lonely, haven't you?" The mental pressure from the other two hatchlings intensified as they picked up on the emotional exchange between their sibling and this strange new creature. The emerald one approached cautiously, while the golden one uncoiled herself from her corner and began to creep forward as well. Within minutes, Sarah found herself seated cross-legged on the floor with 3 dragon hatchlings arranged around her in various states of relaxation. The sapphire one had claimed her lap, curled up like an oversized cat and purring in a way that created small harmonics in the air around them. The emerald hatchling was pressed against her left side, his breathing deep and even as he dozed. The golden one had positioned herself behind Sarah, her small form warm against the human's back. "Impossible," ZYX breathed. "They've never allowed anyone to touch them before." Sarah smiled, carefully stroking the sapphire hatchling's scales. They felt like warm metal silk under her fingers, and she could sense the deep contentment flowing from the small creature. "They were just overwhelmed," she explained quietly. "Think about it from their perspective, they're babies with adult-level telepathic abilities, stuck in a room with a parade of different caretakers who were all broadcasting fear and anxiety. Every person who walked through that door was expecting them to be dangerous, and babies are incredibly sensitive to emotional energy." "But the other caretakers were highly trained professionals," Kelthera protested. "They had years of experience with difficult cases." "I'm sure they did," Sarah agreed. "But sometimes experience can work against you. They came in here knowing these were the offspring of the most powerful dragon in the galaxy, and they were probably thinking about all the ways things could go wrong. These little ones picked up on that anxiety and responded accordingly." The golden hatchling made a small sound and shifted position, her tiny claws gently gripping Sarah's uniform. Through their mental connection, Sarah sensed a complex mix of emotions, relief, curiosity, and something that might have been gratitude. "The other thing is," Sarah continued, "nobody seems to have considered their developmental stage. At this age, dragon or not, babies are just beginning to understand cause and effect. When they breathed fire or used their telepathic abilities, the caretakers would react with fear or try to restrain them. From the baby's perspective, they were just exploring their abilities and trying to communicate, but the adults kept responding with negative emotions. It probably felt like being constantly scolded for something they didn't understand." As if to demonstrate her point, the emerald hatchling stirred and opened his mouth, a small tongue of flame flickering between his tiny fangs. Instead of pulling away, Sarah held perfectly still and spoke in the same calm tone. "Very good," she said approvingly. "You're practicing your fire breathing. That's an important skill for a dragon to learn." The flame grew slightly brighter, but the hatchling was clearly watching Sarah's face for her reaction. When she continued to smile and radiate calm approval, he let the flame die out and made a small chirping sound that might have been pleasure. "You see?" Sarah explained to the amazed administrators. "He's not trying to hurt anyone. He's just proud of his new ability and wants acknowledgement. It's the same as a human baby showing off their first steps or a new word." The sapphire hatchling in her lap shifted and looked up at Sarah with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of ancient wisdom despite belonging to an infant. Through their mental connection, Sarah felt a complex question being formed, something about identity, belonging, and purpose that was far too sophisticated for a 6-month-old of any species. "That's a very big question, little one," Sarah said softly, stroking the space between the hatchling's small horns. "But you don't need to worry about all of that right now. Right now, you just need to focus on growing strong and healthy and learning about the world around you." The mental pressure eased as the hatchling accepted this answer, settling back into contentment. Sarah marveled at the complexity of their developing minds. These babies were going to grow up to be incredibly powerful beings, but right now they were just infants who needed the same things all babies needed: routine, comfort, and someone who could remain calm in the face of their natural abilities. "How are you doing that?" Kelthara asked in wonder. The telepathic contact. Most species require weeks of preparation before they can handle direct mental contact with dragons. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I think it helps that I'm not trying to block them out or control the contact," she said eventually. "I'm just accepting what they're sharing and responding as naturally as I can. Human minds might be simpler than most, but sometimes simplicity is an advantage. I don't have the complex mental structures that might conflict with their telepathic abilities." The golden hatchling behind her made a soft sound and Sarah felt a gentle probing at the edges of her consciousness. Instead of resisting, she opened her mind and shared a memory, the feeling of safety and love from her own childhood, the sensation of being held by someone who cared about her completely. The hatchling's response was immediate and intense, a flood of gratitude and affection that brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. "They've been so lonely," she whispered. "They needed someone who could accept them completely, abilities and all." Over the next several hours, Sarah learned the individual personalities of each hatchling. The emerald one, who she privately began thinking of as Spark, was bold and curious, always the first to investigate new things. He was also the most physically active, constantly testing his growing flight abilities and practicing his flame breath. The sapphire hatchling, Aurora, was more contemplative and seemed to possess the strongest telepathic abilities of the three. She was the one who had made the first contact and often served as a translator when her siblings' mental communications were too complex for Sarah to understand directly. The golden one, Luna, was the most emotionally sensitive of the group. She picked up on the feelings of everyone around her and seemed to take on the role of emotional regulator for her siblings. When Spark got too excited or Aurora became too absorbed in mental exploration, Luna would gently redirect their attention and help restore balance to the group. As the day progressed, Sarah established routines that seemed to bring great comfort to the hatchlings. She created feeding schedules that allowed each one to eat according to their individual needs. Spark required more protein for his rapid physical development, Aurora needed foods rich in minerals that supported neural growth, and Luna thrived on a carefully balanced diet that helped stabilize her emotional sensitivities. She also instituted nap time, though this required considerable creativity. Dragon hatchlings apparently didn't simply lie down and sleep like human babies. Instead, they entered a meditative state that was part sleep, part telepathic communion with their surroundings. Sarah learned to facilitate this by maintaining a steady flow of calm, peaceful thoughts while they rested, effectively serving as a living lullaby for their developing minds. The most challenging aspect was managing their growing abilities. Spark's fire breathing was becoming stronger by the day, and, without proper outlet, he became frustrated and destructive. Sarah solved this by creating a game where he could practice his flames on specially designed targets, turning his natural development into structured play. Aurora's telepathic abilities were expanding rapidly, and she was beginning to pick up on the thoughts and emotions of beings throughout the entire nursery complex. This overwhelming influx of information often left her agitated and confused. Sarah worked with her to practice mental shielding techniques, using simple meditation exercises adapted from human practices. Luna's emotional sensitivity was perhaps the most difficult to manage because it was so closely tied to the well-being of her siblings and everyone around her. Sarah found that the best approach was to maintain her own emotional equilibrium as perfectly as possible, serving as a stable anchor for the sensitive hatchling. By the end of her first week, word of Sarah's success had spread throughout the Imperial Nursery and beyond. Kelthera reported that the Emperor himself had requested daily updates on the progress of his offspring. For the first time in months, the hatchlings were eating properly, sleeping peacefully, and showing healthy development in all areas. But Sarah knew that this was only the beginning. As the weeks passed, the hatchlings would grow larger and more powerful. Their abilities would continue to develop, and their needs would become increasingly complex. She was already thinking ahead to the challenges that lay ahead: how to provide appropriate education for their expanding minds, how to help them understand their eventual role in the Empire, and how to prepare them for a future where they would wield power that could reshape worlds. For now, though, she was content to sit in the peaceful nursery chamber, watching 3 baby dragons play with floating toys while their minds touched hers with trust and affection. She had found her calling in the most unexpected place, caring for the most extraordinary children in the galaxy. And, as she felt their happiness flowing through their telepathic bond, she knew that she had made the right choice in accepting this impossible assignment. The evening rotation was approaching, and normally this would have been when the hatchlings became most agitated, missing the comfort of their caretaker's presence during the night hours. But, as Sarah prepared to leave for her quarters, something unprecedented happened. Instead of becoming distressed, the 3 hatchlings settled into their sleeping alcoves with calm acceptance. Through their bond, Sarah could feel their understanding that she would return in the morning, and their trust that they were safe and loved. As she gathered her belongings, Kelthera approached with an expression of amazement still written clearly across her reptilian features. "Miss Chen," the administrator said quietly, "I must ask, what are your intentions regarding this position? The Emperor will want to know if this arrangement can be considered permanent." Sarah looked back at the 3 sleeping forms, their scales glowing softly in the dim evening light. Spark was curled in his favorite spot near the thermal vent, his breathing deep and even. Aurora had arranged herself near the telepathic resonance crystals, her mental emanations peaceful and controlled. Luna lay in the center alcove, positioned where she could monitor her siblings' emotional states even in sleep. "I can't imagine wanting to be anywhere else," Sarah said softly. "These children need someone who understands that being extraordinary doesn't mean being dangerous. They need someone who can help them grow into their power with wisdom and compassion." Kelthera nodded slowly. "The Emperor will be pleased. But, I must warn you, as they grow, there will be new challenges. Dragon adolescence is unlike anything most beings can imagine. Their powers will increase exponentially, and their emotional development can be turbulent." Sarah smiled, thinking of the teenagers she'd worked with back on Earth, the anger, the rebellion, the intense emotions that seemed to consume everything in their path. "I've dealt with adolescents before. The principles remain the same, regardless of whether their tantrums involve slamming doors or accidentally melting walls." As she left the nursery that night, Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had found her place in the galaxy, and, more importantly, she had given 3 remarkable children the gift of understanding and acceptance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but, for the first time since arriving on Draconos Prime, she felt truly at home. 3 months had passed since Sarah's first day in the Imperial Nursery, and the changes were remarkable. The once chaotic chamber had transformed into a haven of organized activity and purposeful play. Custom-designed equipment filled the space, flame-resistant climbing structures for Spark's physical development, telepathic enhancement crystals for Aurora's mental training, and emotional regulation chambers for Luna's sensitive nature. The hatchlings themselves had grown considerably. They were now the size of medium dogs, their scales more vibrant and their abilities increasingly sophisticated. Spark could maintain controlled flames for nearly 10 minutes, Aurora could communicate telepathically across vast distances, and Luna had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense and influence the emotional states of beings throughout the nursery complex. Sarah had established herself as more than just a caretaker, she had become their teacher, protector, and the anchor that kept their rapidly expanding powers from overwhelming their still developing minds. The bond between human and dragons had deepened to the point where they could communicate complex ideas and emotions without words, a development that had fascinated xenopsychologists throughout the Empire. But, with growth came new challenges that tested even Sarah's considerable experience and patience. Sarah! Spark's excited telepathic voice echoed in her mind as she entered the nursery one morning. Watch this! Before she could react, the young dragon launched himself from the highest perch in the chamber, his wings spread wide as he attempted a complex aerial maneuver. The problem was that his ambitions far exceeded his current abilities, and Sarah watched in horror as he began to tumble toward the crystalline floor. Without thinking, she sprinted forward and, catching the surprised hatchling just before he would have crashed. They both hit the padded section of the floor with an impact that knocked the breath from Sarah's lungs, but Spark was unharmed. Easy there, hotshot, Sarah gasped, sitting up slowly while the concerned dragon nuzzled her face with his warm snout. Your flight skills are improving, but you need to master the basics before you try the advanced moves. Aurora materialized beside them, her larger form moving with the fluid grace that marked her as the most naturally coordinated of the three siblings. Her mental voice carried worry and reproach as she communicated with her brother. She's right, Spark. Aurora's telepathic communication reached Sarah as well. You could have been hurt. We need Sarah to be safe too. This was a new development that both thrilled and concerned Sarah. The hatchlings were beginning to understand that their actions could affect others, showing the early stages of empathy and social awareness. But they were also starting to display protective instincts toward her that could become problematic as they grew larger and more powerful. Luna approached from her favorite spot near the emotional resonance crystals, her golden scales shimmering with agitation. The sensitive hatchling could always sense when tension arose in the group, and she immediately began projecting calming influence through her telepathic abilities. Thank you, Luna, Sarah said aloud, knowing that the young dragon appreciated verbal acknowledgement along with mental communication. But, remember what we discussed about using your abilities. It's better to help others find their own calm rather than imposing yours upon them. The complexity of raising telepathic beings was something Sarah was still learning to navigate. Each of the hatchlings possessed abilities that could easily influence or even control the minds of others, and teaching them the ethics of mental powers was proving to be one of her greatest challenges. A soft chime indicated that feeding time was approaching, and Sarah began preparing their increasingly sophisticated meals. Dragon hatchlings required not just physical nutrition but also various forms of energy that supported their supernatural abilities. Spark needed minerals that would strengthen his flame generation organs, Aurora required substances that enhanced neural conductivity for her telepathic powers, and Luna needed compounds that helped stabilize her emotional sensing abilities. As they ate, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. The hatchlings were unconsciously synchronizing their movements, eating in perfect rhythm with each other. Their telepathic bond had grown so strong that they were beginning to function almost like a collective consciousness at times. Individual identity, Sarah said suddenly, interrupting their meal. 3 pairs of large, intelligent eyes turned toward her in curiosity. You're becoming so connected that you're starting to lose track of your individual selves, Sarah explained, settling down beside them. While it's wonderful that you share such a strong bond, it's important that each of you maintains your own unique identity and perspective. Aurora tilted her head, a gesture that had become her signature expression when processing complex ideas. But the bond feels safe. Complete. Why would we want separation? This was exactly the kind of philosophical question that Sarah had learned to expect from these extraordinary children. Their intelligence was developing at a rate that sometimes left her struggling to keep up, and they regularly posed queries that would challenge seasoned philosophers. Because diversity makes you stronger, Sarah explained patiently. Spark, your boldness and willingness to take risks teaches your siblings to be brave. Aurora, your analytical nature helps them think through problems carefully. Luna, your emotional sensitivity keeps the group connected and caring. If you lose those individual traits, you all become less than you could be. To demonstrate her point, Sarah pulled out a set of crystals that she had specially crafted for this purpose. Each crystal was a different color and produced a different tone when struck. Individually, they created beautiful but simple sounds. But, when used together in the right combination, they could create complex harmonies that were far more beautiful than any single note. This is what I mean, she said, playing a brief melody that incorporated all 3 crystals. Each one is valuable on its own, but together they create something amazing.
The magic isn't in being the same, it's in being different but working in harmony. The hatchlings considered this lesson seriously, their young minds wrestling with concepts that would challenge adult beings of most species.
Sarah had learned that their intellectual development was proceeding at an almost frightening pace, while their emotional maturity was following a more normal pattern. This created unique challenges as they struggled to process complex ideas with minds that were still fundamentally childlike in their emotional responses. The afternoon brought a visit from Emperor Vorthak himself, something that had become a weekly occurrence since Sarah's arrival. The massive dragon could barely fit through the nursery entrance, but he always made the effort to check on his offspring personally. Sarah had initially been terrified of these visits, but she had gradually come to understand that despite his fearsome reputation, Vorthak was simply a father who loved his children deeply. His presence filled the chamber with an aura of barely contained power that made the air itself seem to vibrate, but his interactions with the hatchlings were surprisingly gentle.
Father!
The three young voices echoed in unison, both vocally and telepathically, as they rushed to greet him. Vorthak's massive head lowered to nuzzle each of his children in turn, his enormous eyes soft with paternal affection. When he turned his attention to Sarah, she felt the full weight of his telepathic presence, like standing at the edge of an ocean of consciousness that could easily sweep her away. Nurse Chen, his mental voice resonated with the power of thunder, but carried warmth and gratitude. Once again, I find my children thriving under your care. Their progress continues to exceed all expectations. They're remarkable children, Your Majesty, Sarah replied, both aloud and telepathically. She had learned to project her thoughts clearly enough that the Emperor could receive them, though the effort always left her mentally exhausted. Their intelligence and abilities are developing beautifully, but they're still just babies in many ways. They need guidance and patience. Vorthak's attention turned to his offspring, who were now competing for his attention with typical sibling behavior. Spark was showing off his latest flight maneuvers, Aurora was demonstrating her expanded telepathic range, and Luna was projecting waves of happiness that made everyone in the chamber feel more content.
Show me what you have learned today, the Emperor commanded gently. What followed was a display that would have amazed beings throughout the galaxy.
Working together, the three hatchlings created a coordinated demonstration of their abilities. Spark generated a controlled flame that formed complex patterns in the air, Aurora used her telepathic powers to guide floating objects through intricate dances, and Luna provided emotional undertones that gave the entire performance a sense of joy and wonder. But what impressed Sarah most was not the raw display of power, but the cooperation and consideration they showed for each other. Each hatchling took care not to interfere with their siblings' efforts, and they communicated constantly to ensure their activities remained in harmony.
Excellent, Vorthak rumbled with satisfaction.
You honor your lineage with such skill and cooperation. After the Emperor departed, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed since arriving on Draconos Prime. She had originally expected to serve as a temporary caretaker until more qualified personnel could be found. Instead, she had become an integral part of the imperial family, trusted with the care and education of beings who would someday rule significant portions of the galaxy. The evening brought new challenges as the hatchlings' energy levels remained high well past their usual sleep time.
This was becoming a recurring problem as their physical development accelerated.
They needed more stimulation and exercise to tire them out sufficiently for rest.
How about we try something new tonight? Sarah suggested, settling into her usual spot in the center of the chamber.
Instead of individual meditation, let's practice group consciousness exercises.
The hatchlings perked up immediately.
Group activities were always popular, especially ones that involved their telepathic abilities.
Here's how it works, Sarah explained.
We'll create a shared mental space where we can all exist together safely. But each of you needs to maintain your own identity within that space. Think of it as visiting each other's minds without losing yourselves. This was advanced training that Sarah had developed specifically for their unique situation. Most species never attempted group consciousness until they were adults with fully developed mental defenses. But the hatchlings' natural telepathic bond made such exercises not only possible but necessary for their healthy development. Aurora immediately took the lead, her powerful mind creating the initial framework for their shared mental space. Sarah felt herself drawn into a realm of pure thought and sensation, where concepts took on visual form and emotions had color and texture. Spark's presence appeared as a bright flame that danced and flickered with excitement, while Luna manifested as a gentle golden light that pulsed in rhythm with her emotional state. Sarah's own consciousness felt strange and foreign in this environment, less powerful than the dragons but somehow more stable, providing an anchor point that kept the shared space from becoming chaotic. Within this mental realm, they could communicate with perfect clarity and share experiences that would have been impossible to convey through words alone. Sarah shared memories of her childhood on Earth, the feeling of rain on skin, the taste of chocolate, the sound of ocean waves. The hatchlings reciprocated with sensations unique to their draconic nature, the joy of flame flowing through specialized organs, the exhilaration of telepathic contact across vast distances, the satisfaction of perfect aerial maneuvers. But, the most remarkable aspect of these sessions was how they strengthened both their individual identities and their group bonds simultaneously. Within the shared space, each personality became more distinct rather than less so, as if the contrast with others helped define their unique characteristics more clearly. As the session wound down and they gradually separated their consciousness, all three hatchlings showed signs of deep relaxation. The mental exercise had provided exactly the kind of stimulation they needed while also teaching them valuable lessons about cooperation and individual integrity. "Sleep well, my friends," Sarah whispered as they settled into their sleeping alcoves. The term of endearment had evolved naturally over their months together. She was no longer just their caretaker or teacher, she had become their friend and trusted companion. But, as she prepared to leave for the night, Aurora's mental voice stopped her. Sarah, the young dragon's telepathic communication carried an unusual note of concern. "I've been sensing something strange. There are minds approaching Draconos Prime that feel angry. Hostile." Sarah paused, considering this information carefully. Aurora's telepathic range had been expanding rapidly, and she was now capable of detecting approaching spacecraft while they were still days away from the planet. If she was sensing hostile intent, how many minds? Sarah asked quietly, not wanting to alarm the other hatchlings. "Many," Aurora replied, her mental voice troubled. "And they're thinking about taking us away from you." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. She had known this day might come. Beings throughout the galaxy were aware of the Imperial hatchlings' existence, and there were always those who might see them as valuable prizes to be captured or bargaining chips to be used against the Empire. "Don't worry," Sarah said firmly, both aloud and telepathically. "No one is going to take you away. The Emperor won't allow it, and neither will I." But, even as she spoke these reassuring words, Sarah's mind was already racing through possibilities and contingencies. If hostile forces were indeed approaching, the nursery would become a target. She would need to be prepared to protect the hatchlings not just from their own developing powers, but from external threats as well. Over the following days, the approaching danger became increasingly apparent. Aurora's telepathic reports grew more detailed and more alarming. The hostile fleet consisted of ships from multiple species, suggesting some sort of alliance or coordinated effort. Their intentions were indeed focused on the Imperial hatchlings, though Aurora could not determine their exact plans. Emperor Vorthak increased security around the nursery and deployed additional defensive forces throughout the system, but he also made it clear that the safety of his offspring remains Sarah's primary responsibility. "The nursery complex has been designed to withstand siege conditions," he explained during an emergency briefing. "But, if the unthinkable happens and they breach our defenses, you must be prepared to protect my children by any means necessary." Sarah nodded grimly, understanding the weight of responsibility being placed upon her. She began implementing emergency protocols, creating secure hiding places within the nursery and teaching the hatchlings what to do if danger threatened. But, the most challenging aspect was helping them understand the situation without traumatizing them. They were still children, despite their extraordinary abilities, and the concept of beings who wished them harm was difficult for their young minds to process. "Why would anyone want to hurt us?" Luna asked during one of their evening sessions, her emotional sensitivity having picked up on the general atmosphere of tension and worry. "They don't necessarily want to hurt you," Sarah explained carefully. "But some beings think that having you in their power would give them advantages over the Empire. They see you as tools to be used rather than children to be loved and protected." Spark's scales brightened with indignation.
We're not tools.
No, you're not, Sarah agreed firmly. You're remarkable individuals with your own thoughts, feelings, and futures to determine. And anyone who tries to treat you otherwise will have to deal with me first. The hatchlings picked up on her fierce protectiveness, and their own defensive instincts began to manifest. Sparks' flames burned hotter and, more aggressively, Aurora's telepathic abilities took on an edge that could disorient potential threats, and Luna's emotional influence became more forceful and directed. Sarah realized that she was witnessing the emergence of their adult powers earlier than expected, triggered by the perception of danger. It was both thrilling and terrifying to see the glimpses of what they would become, beings of such power that they could reshape reality according to their will. The first sign of actual attack came 3 days later, when the orbital defense platforms detected ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Aurora confirmed what the sensors revealed: the hostile fleet had arrived, and their intentions were unmistakably aggressive. As alarms began sounding throughout the Imperial complex, Sarah gathered the hatchlings in the center of the nursery chamber and activated the emergency protocols. Blast shields sealed the entrances, defensive systems came online, and the chamber was isolated from the rest of the complex. "Remember what we practiced," Sarah said calmly, though her heart was racing. "Stay together, stay calm, and trust that we'll get through this safely." Through the telepathic bond, she could feel their fear and confusion, but also their determination to protect each other and their trust in her ability to keep them safe. It was both humbling and empowering to realize how completely these extraordinary children had come to depend on her. The sound of distant explosions reached them even through the heavily shielded chamber, and Sarah knew that the real test was only just beginning. Everything she had learned about caring for impossible children was about to be put to the ultimate trial. The battle raged for 6 hours before the attackers managed to breach the outer defenses of the Imperial nursery complex. Sarah had spent those hours keeping the hatchlings calm and focused, using every technique she had developed over their months together. They meditated through the sound of explosions, practiced their abilities to keep their minds occupied, and maintained their telepathic bond to provide mutual comfort. But, when the first blast door finally gave way and hostile forces entered the outer corridors, everything changed. Aurora's head snapped up from her resting position, her large eyes wide with alarm. "They're inside the building," she reported telepathically. "I can sense their minds, they're excited and determined. They think they're close to success." Sarah checked the defensive systems one more time, confirming that the nursery chamber itself remained secure. The inner barriers were designed to withstand assault from even the most advanced weapons, and the Emperor had assured her that it would take days for any attacking force to break through. But, as if summoned by her confidence, a new sound reached them, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was the distinctive whine of matter disintegrators, weapons so powerful that they could unmake any substance at the molecular level. The attackers had come prepared for exactly this scenario.
"How long until they reach us?"
Sarah asked Aurora, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Maybe 20 minutes, the young dragon replied, her telepathic voice tight with concentration as she monitored the approaching threats.
"They're moving methodically, destroying every barrier in their path." Sarah's mind raced through options.
The emergency protocols included escape routes, but they led through corridors that would soon be occupied by hostile forces. The communication systems were down, cut off by the attackers to prevent calls for reinforcement. They were truly on their own. "Listen to me carefully," Sarah said, gathering the 3 hatchlings around her. "We may need to leave this chamber sooner than planned. If that happens, I need you to trust me completely and follow my instructions without question, even if they seem wrong or frightening."
Spark's scales brightened with agitation. "Why can't we just fight them? We're dragons. We have powers." "Because you're still children," Sarah said firmly.
"Your powers are growing, but you haven't learned to control them under stress. In a real fight, you could hurt yourselves or each other. My job is to keep you safe until you're old enough and trained enough to protect yourselves." Luna pressed closer to Sarah's side, her emotional sensitivity overwhelming her with the fear and aggression radiating from the approaching attackers. "I don't like their feelings," she whispered aloud, her usual telepathic communication disrupted by distress.
"They feel hungry. Like they want to own us."
"That's exactly what they want," Sarah confirmed, stroking the golden hatchling's scales gently. But they don't understand that you can't truly own someone with thoughts and feelings of their own. You belong to yourselves, and to your family, and to no one else. The sound of matter disintegrators grew closer, accompanied now by the heavy footsteps of armored beings and the harsh voices of military communication. Through Aurora's telepathic monitoring, Sarah could track their progress as they methodically destroyed every obstacle between themselves and their goal. Then, Aurora stiffened, her mental voice sharp with alarm. "Sarah, there's something else. I'm detecting a powerful telepathic presence with them, someone who knows how to shield their thoughts. They're planning something specific for when they reach us." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had hoped that the attackers would rely on conventional weapons and tactics, which the nursery's defenses were designed to handle. But a powerful telepath could potentially overcome the hatchlings' natural mental defenses or turn their own abilities against them. "New plan," Sarah announced, moving to a section of the chamber that appeared to be nothing more than decorative wall paneling. She activated a hidden mechanism, revealing a small passage that led to the nursery's emergency systems. "We're not waiting for them to break in. We're going to them." "What do you mean?" Spark asked, his confusion evident through their mental bond. "I mean, we're going to do something they won't expect," Sarah replied, her hands working quickly at a control panel concealed within the passage. "They're planning to corner us in here, where they have all the advantages. Instead, we're going to meet them in the corridors, where we can use mobility and surprise." Aurora's eyes widened with understanding. "You're talking about a fighting retreat." "Exactly. We'll move through the complex, staying ahead of them while gradually leading them toward a specific location where we can turn the tables." Sarah finished her work at the control panel and turned back to the hatchlings. "But this will only work if you trust me completely. There will be moments when you think I'm making the wrong choice, when your instincts tell you to fight or flee in a different direction. You have to promise me that you'll follow my lead no matter what." The three young dragons exchanged glances, their telepathic communion rapid and complex. Finally, Aurora spoke for all of them. "We trust you, Sarah. Lead the way." Sarah opened a concealed exit that connected to the nursery's maintenance tunnels, pathways that she had studied extensively during her months of preparing for emergencies. The passages were narrow and uncomfortable, designed for automated systems rather than living beings, but they offered routes that the attackers would not expect. As they crawled through the cramped tunnels, Sarah's mind focused on the destination she had chosen, the nursery complex's primary power core chamber. It was a risky gambit, but if her plan worked, it would provide them with advantages that could shift the balance of the confrontation entirely. Behind them, the sound of the nursery chamber's final defenses being breached echoed through the tunnels. Angry voices shouted in multiple alien languages as the attackers discovered their quarry had escaped. Through Aurora's telepathic monitoring, Sarah could sense their frustration and the rapid recalculation of their plans. "They're spreading out to search the entire complex," Aurora reported as they reached a junction in the tunnel system. "The telepath is trying to locate us by scanning for our mental signatures." "Can you hide us from them?" Sarah asked. For a while, Aurora replied, her young face creased with concentration. "But not indefinitely. Their telepath is very strong." Sarah nodded, having expected this. Her plan didn't rely on remaining hidden forever, just long enough to reach their destination and prepare their surprise. The power core chamber was one of the most secure locations in the entire complex, accessible only through a series of heavily protected checkpoints. But Sarah had discovered during her security briefings that the maintenance tunnels provided a direct route that bypassed most of these obstacles. When they finally emerged into the massive chamber that housed the nursery's primary power source, all three hatchlings gasped in wonder. The core itself was a thing of beauty, a crystalline sphere the size of a small building that pulsed with contained energy, surrounded by field generators and control systems that hummed with barely audible power. "Sarah," Spark said wonderingly, "this place feels alive." He was right. The power core was more than just an energy source, it was a fusion reactor enhanced with draconian technology that gave it an almost organic responsiveness. It could sense the presence of draconic minds and respond to their needs, a feature that had been built into the nursery's systems at the Emperor's specific request. "That's exactly what I was hoping for," Sarah said, moving to the primary control console. This reactor was designed to support your development, which means it's attuned to your telepathic signatures. With the right adjustments, we can turn it into the galaxy's most powerful amplifier for your abilities. Aurora's understanding was immediate and impressive. You want us to use the reactor to enhance our powers beyond their current limits. More than that, Sarah replied, her hands dancing over controls she had studied but never dared to use. I want you to use it to project your consciousness throughout the entire complex. With that kind of amplification, you'll be able to affect the minds of every attacker simultaneously. Luna looked worried. But we've never done anything like that before. What if we hurt someone by accident? It was a valid concern. The hatchling's powers, amplified by the reactor, could easily cause permanent damage to unprotected minds. But Sarah had already considered this problem. That's why I'm going to be your guide, she explained. Through our mental bond, I can help you focus and control the effect. Human minds are naturally resistant to telepathic interference in ways that most species aren't. I can serve as a filter to ensure you only affect your targets appropriately. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed from the corridors outside the power core chamber. Their pursuers had tracked them down more quickly than Sarah had hoped. But they were ready. Positions, Sarah commanded, and the three hatchlings arranged themselves around the reactor's control interface according to the plan they had hastily formulated. Sarah took her place at the center, her hands on the primary controls while her mind opened completely to the telepathic bond they all shared. The chamber doors burst open and armed figures poured through, beings from a dozen different species, all wearing advanced combat gear and carrying weapons capable of stunning or capturing dragon hatchlings without permanent harm. Behind them came a figure that made Sarah's skin crawl, a Voidwalker, a species of natural telepaths known for their ability to dominate other minds. Surrender the hatchlings, the Voidwalker commanded, its mental voice carrying compulsive force that would have overwhelmed most beings. They belong to forces greater than your dying empire. They belong to themselves, Sarah replied calmly, her finger hovering over the reactor's activation control. And they've already chosen where their loyalty lies. She triggered the activation sequence, and the power core's energy output suddenly spiked to levels that made the air itself crackle with electricity. Through the telepathic bond, Sarah felt the hatchling's consciousness expanding exponentially as the reactor's energy merged with their natural abilities. Spark's fire generation capabilities exploded beyond anything previously imagined, but instead of creating destructive flames, the enhanced power allowed him to generate fields of controlled plasma that could disrupt electronic equipment without harming organic beings. Aurora's telepathic abilities expanded to encompass every mind within a kilometer radius, giving her instant awareness of every attacker's location and intentions. Luna's emotional manipulation powers became so refined that she could influence specific thoughts and feelings with surgical precision. But the most remarkable effect was how their enhanced abilities worked in harmony under Sarah's guidance. Instead of three separate powers running wild, they became components of a single, coordinated system that addressed every aspect of their situation simultaneously. The attacking forces found their weapons failing as Spark's plasma fields disrupted their electronic systems. Their tactical coordination collapsed as Aurora flooded their communication networks with false information and misdirection. Most importantly, Luna's emotional influence began working on their motivations and decision-making processes, not to control them, but to help them understand the true consequences of their actions. The Voidwalker, recognizing the nature of the threat it faced, attempted to use its own telepathic powers to disrupt the hatchling's enhanced abilities. But it had made a critical miscalculation. Sarah's human consciousness, serving as the anchor and guide for the enhanced dragons, was naturally resistant to telepathic domination in ways the Voidwalker had never encountered. You don't understand what you're interfering with, the Voidwalker snarled, its mental pressure increasing as it struggled against Sarah's unexpected resistance. These children are meant for purposes beyond your comprehension. They're meant to choose their own purposes, Sarah replied, her connection to the hatchlings allowing her to speak with authority that resonated with power. And they choose to protect the innocent and defend those who cannot defend themselves. Through Luna's emotional influence, the attacking forces began to experience something unexpected: empathy for their targets. Instead of seeing the hatchlings as valuable prizes or tools to be captured, they began to perceive them as they truly were, children who deserved protection and care rather than exploitation. The change was gradual at first, then rapidly accelerating as more and more of the attackers found their motivations shifting. Weapons were lowered, then dropped entirely. Orders were questioned and ultimately ignored. The coordinated assault dissolved into confusion and self-reflection as beings who had come to steal children began to understand the true nature of their actions. But the Voidwalker was not so easily swayed. Its species was naturally resistant to emotional manipulation, and its telepathic abilities made it capable of fighting back against the hatchling's enhanced powers. As the creature realized that its mission was failing, its mental attacks became more desperate and dangerous. Sarah felt the pressure of the Voidwalker's assault like physical blows against her consciousness. Through the telepathic bond, she could sense the hatchlings' distress as they struggled to maintain their enhanced abilities while protecting themselves from the creature's mental attacks. Then, Spark, Aurora, and Luna did something that surprised even Sarah. They began to protect her as much as she was protecting them. Instead of simply using her as an anchor for their abilities, they extended their enhanced powers to shield her mind from the Voidwalker's assault. The result was a mental harmony that transcended anything they had achieved before. Human determination and draconic power merged into something greater than the sum of its parts, creating a telepathic presence so stable and powerful that the Voidwalker's attacks became ineffective. Recognizing defeat, the creature made one final, desperate attempt to achieve its mission. It abandoned its mental attacks and instead lunged physically toward Luna, apparently intending to capture at least one of the hatchlings through brute force. But Spark was ready. His enhanced abilities allowed him to generate a plasma barrier that stopped the Voidwalker in its tracks, while Aurora used her amplified telepathic powers to overwhelm the creature's mental defenses entirely. Luna's emotional influence completed the defeat, filling the Voidwalker's consciousness with such powerful feelings of remorse and self-reflection that it collapsed to the floor in a state of complete psychological shock. With their leader defeated and their own motivations fundamentally altered by Luna's influence, the remaining attackers surrendered without further resistance. Many of them seemed genuinely confused about why they had participated in an assault on children, their enhanced empathy making their previous actions incomprehensible to them. As the immediate threat passed, Sarah carefully began the process of powering down the reactor enhancement. The transition had to be gradual to avoid overwhelming the hatchlings' developing nervous systems. Even so, the experience of returning to their normal power levels was clearly disorienting for all three of them. "That was incredible," Aurora whispered, her young voice filled with wonder. "I could sense minds across the entire star system." "Is that what it will be like when we're adults?" "Something like that," Sarah agreed, though she suspected their adult abilities would far exceed even what they had just experienced. "But remember, power without wisdom is dangerous. What you did today wasn't about how strong you could become, but about how you chose to use your strength." Spark looked around at the surrendered attackers, many of whom seemed to be experiencing genuine remorse for their actions. "We didn't really hurt anyone, did we?" "No," Sarah confirmed. "You protected yourselves and others without causing lasting harm. You found a way to end the threat without becoming the kind of beings who solve problems through violence." Luna approached one of the former attackers, a young being who appeared to be crying. Without hesitation, she extended her natural empathy to provide comfort, helping the confused individual process the emotional turmoil caused by the sudden shift in perspective. Emperor Vorthak arrived minutes later, accompanied by his personal guard and a full medical team. The massive dragon's relief at finding his offspring safe was palpable, filling the entire chamber with an aura of paternal joy that made everyone present feel warmer and more secure. "I sensed the resonance from across the planet," Vorthak rumbled, his enormous eyes taking in the scene of defeated attackers and unharmed hatchlings. "The power you channeled through the reactor, it was magnificent and terrible." "They were magnificent," Sarah corrected gently. "The power was always theirs. They just needed the right circumstances to discover how to use it wisely." Over the following hours, as the situation was fully resolved and the attackers were processed according to Imperial law, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much had changed since her arrival on Draconos Prime. She had come expecting to provide basic childcare for unusual infants. Instead, she had become part of something far more significant, the raising and education of beings who would shape the future of galactic civilization. The hatchlings had proven themselves capable of incredible power when necessary, but, more importantly, they had demonstrated wisdom and compassion that boded well for their future roles as leaders. Under Sarah's guidance, they were learning that true strength came not from the ability to dominate others, but from the wisdom to know when and how to use their abilities responsibly. But, perhaps the most remarkable development was the bond that had formed between human and dragons. What had begun as a simple caretaking arrangement had evolved into something unprecedented, a genuine partnership between species that bridged differences in biology, psychology, and fundamental nature. As they settled back into the reconstructed nursery chambers that evening, the three hatchlings gathered around Sarah for their usual evening meditation session. But tonight felt different. They were no longer just children learning about their abilities, they were young adults beginning to understand their responsibilities to themselves and others. Sarah, Aurora said as they prepared for their shared consciousness exercise, "When we're grown and have our own responsibilities in the Empire, will you stay with us?" Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of affection flow through their telepathic bond. "As long as you need me and want me around, I'll be here. After all, someone has to make sure you don't let all that power go to your heads." Spark's laughter echoed both audibly and telepathically. "You mean someone has to keep us humble?" "I mean someone has to remind you that no matter how powerful you become, you're still the same children who once needed help learning to share toys and take turns during feeding time," Sarah replied. "Growth is wonderful, but it's important not to forget where you came from." Luna curled up beside Sarah, her golden scales warm against the human side. "We won't forget," she promised. "And we won't let anyone else forget either. We'll make sure that the galaxy becomes a place where all children can grow up safe and loved, just like we did." As they settled into their evening meditation, Sarah marveled at how these extraordinary children had exceeded every expectation. They had faced genuine danger and emerged not just victorious, but wiser and more compassionate than before. Under her care, they had learned that their greatest strength lay not in their individual abilities, but in their capacity for love, understanding, and moral courage. The bond between human and dragons had proven stronger than any force that opposed it, and Sarah knew that this was only the beginning of their story together. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would test their wisdom and strength in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But whatever the future held, they would face it together, teacher and students, protector and protected, family in all the ways that truly mattered. In the months and years that followed, the story of the human nurse who had tamed the untamable dragon hatchlings would become legend throughout the galaxy. But those who knew the truth understood that Sarah had never tamed anyone. Instead, she had done something far more remarkable. She had helped three extraordinary children learn to tame themselves, to channel their incredible gifts in service of wisdom and compassion rather than mere power. And, as the hatchlings grew into their full strength and took their places as leaders of the Draconian Empire, they carried with them the lessons their human guardian had taught them. The galaxy became a safer, more just place not because its rulers were powerful, but because they had learned from someone who understood that the greatest strength of all was the courage to choose love over fear, understanding over domination, and wisdom over mere force. Sarah Chen had come to Draconos Prime as a simple nurse looking for work. She remained as something far more significant, the teacher who had helped shape the future of galactic civilization by raising three baby dragons to understand that their greatest power lay in their capacity for compassion. In the end, she had not just cared for impossible children, she had helped them become the best possible versions of themselves.